If you walk long enough and far enough, you start to notice something. Not what's there, but what isn't. The road, if you can call it that, doesn't really end. It just slowly gives up. The gravel fades into dirt. The dirt fades into grass. And then even the grass seems unsure if it wants to keep growing. It's quiet here. Not the nice kind of quiet either. Not the peaceful village morning kind. No birds singing like they're in a nature documentary. No distant voices. No barking dogs arguing with each other about absolutely nothing. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like it's watching you back. If you stand still for a moment, and you probably will because there's nowhere else to go, you might notice the wind. It moves slowly, like it has all the time in the world. It drifts through the trees, brushing against leaves that don't seem very interested in responding. Even the trees feel careful, like they're trying not to disturb something, or maybe not to wake something. But there's nothing here. At least that's what it looks like. No houses. No smoke rising from chimneys. No fences. No paths worn down by years of footsteps. No signs that people ever stood here, laughed here, argued here about who forgot to bring water back from the well. Nothing. And that's the strange part. Because people did live here. Not one or two. Not just a lonely cabin tucked away from the world. No, this was a village. A real one. The kind where everyone knows everyone. The kind where news travels faster than it should, and secrets don't stay secret for very long. Families lived here. Children ran through these fields, well, where the fields used to be. People worked, rested, celebrated, complained about the weather even when the weather was perfectly fine. You know, normal things. Hundreds of people by most accounts. And then one day, they were gone. No warning that made sense. No clear sign of panic. No message neatly explaining everything like, hey, just stepping out for a bit, back soon. Nothing like that. They just disappeared. All of them. And not in the dramatic way you might expect. No great fire. No battle. No ruins left behind to tell a story. No dramatic music playing in the background as everything collapses. Just absence. Which somehow is worse. Because absence doesn't explain itself. Now, if you're thinking, okay, but maybe they just moved, that's fair. That's a reasonable thought. People move all the time. They pack their things, say their goodbyes, and head somewhere new. Except, that's not what happened here. Because when the first outsiders arrived, weeks later, maybe months, depending on which record you trust, they didn't find an empty village. They found nothing. Not an abandoned village. Not a ruined one. Just nothing. It was as if the village had never been built in the first place. And yet, there were records. Maps that marked its location. Letters that mentioned it in passing, like it was just another ordinary place. Trade logs. Small details that don't usually survive unless something was very real, very lived in. You don't accidentally imagine a whole village into existence. That would be impressive, but no. This place existed. People woke up here every morning. They had routines, habits. Probably that one neighbor who always borrowed things and never returned them. Every village has one. It's like a rule. So where did it all go? And more importantly, how does something like that happen without leaving behind even a trace? No broken furniture. No scattered belongings. No footprints leading away. Not even the kind of mess you'd expect if people left in a hurry. You know, the grab everything you can and hope for the best kind of situation. None of that. Just open land and quiet air. If you were standing here now, you might try to imagine it. Where the houses stood. Where the paths ran between them. Where people gathered in the evenings, talking about small things that felt important at the time. But the land doesn't help you. It doesn't give clues. It doesn't hint at what came before. It just sits there, as if it has already decided that whatever happened here is not something it plans to share. And maybe that's what makes this story different. There are plenty of stories about lost places. Ruined cities swallowed by forests. Villages abandoned after disasters. Places where time moved on, but the evidence stayed behind like a quiet witness. This isn't one of those stories. Because here, the evidence didn't stay. It left. Or it was taken. Or it was never allowed to remain. And that's where things start to feel a little uncomfortable. Not scary, exactly. Just off. Like when you walk into a room and forget why you went there, but something about it feels slightly wrong. Except this isn't a room. It's an entire village. Or at least to us. The truth is, we don't know exactly when the last person disappeared. There's no official final day marked in history. No record that says, this is when everything ended. Instead, the village simply stops being mentioned, as if it slipped out of the world's memory without making a sound. One moment it exists, the next it doesn't, and no one notices right away, which might be the strangest part of all, because you'd think a whole village disappearing would be a big deal. News would spread, people would talk, there would be questions, investigations, maybe even a few wild rumors thrown in for good measure. But that didn't happen. Not immediately. It took time before anyone realized something was wrong. Time for silence to settle in. Time for absence to become normal. And by the time people did start asking questions, it was already too late. Too late to see what really happened. Too late to follow any kind of trail. Too late to hear the voices that once filled this place. All that remained was the silence. The same silence you'd hear if you stood there now. Unmoving, unchanging, patient, as if it had been waiting all along. And maybe in a way it has. Because whatever happened here didn't just take the people. It took the story with them, leaving behind only fragments, questions, and a stretch of land that refuses to explain itself. So tonight, we're going to try. Not to solve it completely. That would be too easy and honestly a little suspicious. But to piece it together, slowly, carefully, like walking through that quiet place, step by step, trying not to miss anything. Because somewhere in what little remains, in old records, scattered mentions, and strange details that don't quite fit, there might be an answer, or at least something close enough to one. And it all begins here, with a village that simply stopped being there. To understand how a place can disappear, you first have to understand where it was. Because location matters a lot. It's the difference between something being impossible and something being just unlikely enough to happen when no one is paying attention. The village, at least according to the records that still exist, wasn't anywhere people would casually pass through. You didn't accidentally end up there. There were no main roads leading to it, no trade routes cutting neatly through the area, no convenient shortcuts that travelers might take if they were feeling adventurous or slightly lost. And people do get slightly lost, often, but not here. This place sat in a kind of natural pocket, a quiet, tucked-away stretch of land surrounded by dense forest on most sides. The kind of forest that doesn't feel welcoming, not dangerous, exactly, just uninterested in you. Tall trees, thick undergrowth, the sort of place where paths disappear if you stop walking them for a while. And beyond the forest, those not dramatic mountain climbing hills, just long, slow rises in the land that make travel feel a bit more tiring than it should. Enough to discourage regular visitors. Enough to make you think, maybe I'll just go somewhere easier instead. Most people probably did. And that's the thing. Isolation like this doesn't happen by accident. People chose to settle here, which raises a very normal, very reasonable question. But the land itself wasn't bad. That's important. We're not talking about some cursed wasteland where crops refuse to grow and the ground looks suspiciously dramatic all the time. No glowing cracks. No strange fog rolling in every 5 minutes like it's trying out for a horror movie. Just land. Good soil by most accounts. Enough for farming. A nearby water source, likely a river or a deep spring, though the exact details are frustratingly vague. History, as it turns out, is great at remembering important events, and not so great at remembering where exactly people got their water from. But still, it was livable. More than livable, actually. It supported a full village for years, maybe decades. So people stayed. They built homes, cleared sections of forest, created paths where there were none before, slowly, patiently turning a quiet stretch of land into something that felt like a place, a real one. If you could go back in time, stand right in the center of it, you probably wouldn't think anything was unusual. You'd see smoke rising from chimneys, hear tools hitting wood, conversations drifting through the air. Maybe someone calling out because they misplaced something important, like a tool or a child. It happens. You'd see movement. And if you ask someone there, hey, isn't this place a bit remote? They'd probably shrug. Because to them, it wasn't remote. It was home. And that changes everything. Now, the nearest town, based on scattered mentions in old records, was far enough away that visits weren't frequent. We're talking days of travel, not a quick trip. Not something you do just because you felt like getting a different kind of bread for once. You had to plan for it, which meant most people didn't leave often. And most outsiders didn't arrive often either. The village existed in its own little rhythm, its own quiet world, connected to the outside, but only just enough to matter. Trade still happened. That's one of the reasons we even know the village existed at all. There are mentions of goods moving in and out, grain, maybe timber, possibly handmade items. Nothing extraordinary, just the kind of everyday trade that keeps a small community going. But even those records feel distant, like someone writing about a place they've heard of, but don't fully know. Goods received from the village beyond the eastern ridge. That kind of thing. Not detailed, not personal, just enough to confirm, yes, this place was real. And then there are the maps. Old ones, the kind drawn by hand, where accuracy is more of a suggestion than a guarantee. Still, a few of them mark the village's location. A small bit, a name written beside it. Nothing fancy, but enough. Enough to point to a specific area and say that that's where it was. And if you take those maps and you follow them carefully, adjusting for all the little inaccuracies, you end up somewhere very quiet. Somewhere that looks exactly like the place we started. Open land, edges of forest, gentle hills. No village, just the memory of one. And maybe that's where the unease begins to settle in. Because it's one thing to hear about a missing place. It's another to stand where it should be and find nothing waiting for you. Not even ruins. Ruins would be comforting in a strange way. They would say, yes, something was here. Something happened. But this says nothing. It doesn't confirm. It doesn't deny. It just exists, unhelpfully. And the more you think about it, the stranger it becomes. Because villages don't just vanish. They fade maybe. They get abandoned. They collapse over time. Nature takes over. Trees grow through old foundations. Grass covers what used to be roads. There are always signs. Always something left behind. But here, nothing. It's as if the land reset itself. Pressed some invisible undo button and quietly removed everything that didn't belong to it. No buildings. No tools. No traces of daily life. Just space. And that raises a slightly uncomfortable possibility. What if the isolation that once protected the village is the same thing that allowed it to disappear without anyone noticing? Think about it. No nearby witnesses. No constant traffic. No one checking in regularly to make sure everything was still there. If something unusual started to happen, slowly, quietly, there wouldn't be an immediate response. No alarm raised. No quick investigation. Just time. And silence. Plenty of both. It would take days, maybe weeks, before anyone realized something was wrong. And by then, whatever happened would already be over. Gone. Leaving behind only questions. And a location that refuses to answer them. So now we know this much. The village was real. It existed in a place that made sense, isolated but not impossible, quiet but livable. It had just enough connection to the outside world to be remembered, but not enough to be watched. And sometimes that's all it takes. Not something dramatic, not something loud, just distance. And the kind of silence that doesn't rush to explain itself. Because the truth is, places like this don't just disappear overnight. At least, not usually. Something leads up to it. Small things. Easy to ignore. Easy to explain away. Until they aren't. And when we look closer at the village, at the people who lived there, at the quiet patterns of their daily lives, we start to see those small things. The kind that don't seem important at first, but later feel like the beginning of something much bigger. So before everything changed, before the silence took over completely, we need to go back. Back to when the village was still full of life. Still ordinary. Still safe. At least it seemed that way. Because whatever happened here didn't start with the disappearance. It started long before that. In the small, quiet details of everyday life. The kind no one thinks to question until it's too late.